Hey, it's Michael Franti here, and I'm super excited to bring you this Next Stay Human podcast. Just a quick note, we had a little bit of technical difficulty as we were saving the podcast, and so we ended up using a phone recording of the audio. And so it's a little bit rough, but you're still going to be able to hear the incredible ideas from my next guest. Check it out.
Today is Andy Bernstein, who helped found HeadCount. And for those of you who don't know what HeadCount is, it's a voter registration group, and a group that encourages people to really just get off their ass and vote. And, as always, I love talking about the people first. So before we dive into all the HeadCount stuff, Andy, I want to learn about you.
So I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn in the house.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a kid of public school from Brooklyn. And, it was a great way to grow up. Definitely have a perspective coming from the great borough.
Where were you in Brooklyn? Where did you grow up? What neighborhood?
I grew up in a neighborhood called Seagate, which is the tip of Coney Island.
Okay.
It was an interesting place to grow up. Seagate actually was a very middle-class neighborhood that had a fence around it. And the next neighborhood over was Coney Island, which is a more inner-city neighborhood. So it was an interesting way to grow up. Definitely like Brooklyn, and at the same time, like literally protected from the world. It wasn't a wealthy neighborhood at all, but it was definitely like an enclave kind of thing. And it goes back like 100 years that fence has been there. It has its own like police force and things like that. So it was like I kind of had sort of two world views. Like growing up, I went to public school. I didn't go to school in the neighborhood. I went in other neighborhoods. So definitely had that Brooklyn experience, but then had this little protected place. Like kids in Seagate were taught like don't leave the gate without an adult, things like that. So that's
so you went to school in other parts of the city. What was that like? Were the schools like mixed ethnicity? What was it like?
Very much so. I went to a really wonderful high school called John Dewey, which is a
famous high school.
Opened in 1969, and it was a total relic of the 60s. Like it had it was almost more like a college. Like kids had like free time. You had a longer day, so you had free time. The classes were about like learning by doing and a lot of discussion, but it was still like a Brooklyn high school. It was very, very ethnically mixed. It wasn't like the top academic echelon. It was a cross section of Brooklyn, but with like experimental, very liberal learning. So I think that experience had a lot to do with kind of the adult I became. I had wonderful teachers, like amazing teachers who like.
Was there one teacher that you had that really stood out in your growing up here that like made a mark on your life or changed the trajectory of who you became?
Absolutely. His name was Paul Weiss. And I can never talk about him without tearing up because he tragically left us when he was a young man. And this was a teacher who he taught a class called American Dream. By the way, I've never talked about this in an interview, so thank you for asking, Michael, because this was such a formative thing for me. I had this amazing class in high school called American Dream. And it sort of taught American history through values, through the history of what was the American dream. What was the American dream to immigrants? What was the American dream during Civil War? We did like trials and role playing and things like that. And this teacher, Paul Weiss, he loved students, and he loved like kind of seeing the talent they didn't even know they had. And this was a guy who just kind of like sort of picked me out and was like, hey, you've got something. He wanted me to, he also was the faculty advisor of a magazine. And I wrote like controversial articles in the magazine, and he encouraged me. Like if I was getting in trouble for what I was writing, this guy like encouraged me and like stood up for me with the principal and stuff like that. And all that happened. There was all kinds of things. I sort of surrounded myself with a little bit of controversy and things like that.
And how old were you at this time?
16.
Okay. So right in the middle of like being puberty and high school and like all that craziness, and you had this teacher who was there for you.
Totally. And it was like a kind of thing. I feel like if I was at another high school, I probably would have just, not necessarily excelled. Like I would have been a decent student, whatever. Mm-hmm. But this guy sort of just was like, you be you. That was kind of the message to me. And I was a messy kid. I was ink stained. I was like, my shoes were falling apart. And he was just like, that's okay. That's who you are. And I was lucky enough to be in a school where, with the encouragement of teachers, that kind of became cool. One thing about my school is we didn't have sports. We didn't play other schools. And so just the kind of social hierarchies were probably naturally a little bit different. And sometimes like personalities or academics were actually like, sports is obviously a very big thing in a lot of American high schools. And we just didn't have that.
Yeah.
And, so I was able to like, I had a beautiful, amazing girlfriend. I was just like this weird kid who was like always like standing up for something and on some sort of crusade. And it was like cheered on. And I definitely credit this one teacher and really this class. Like, it was just a very, very creative and innovative way of learning. Mm-hmm. And we would do things like, as I said, like trials. Like that's how I learned about the Civil War, was a trial of who was responsible. And I was a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And, it's American education, has a lot of different approaches. And I just got really lucky that I there in Brooklyn at a public school, I was experiencing some of the most innovative education. Spike Lee went to my high school many years before. Several like very.
I've heard your school name dropped in rap songs.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's very cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. What else was going on in your life? Like, what was your family life like? At that time, and what did your parents do, and what was your household like?
So my parents are both teachers. My dad.
Mine are too. Both of my parents were teachers too.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my mom was a professor at Brooklyn College, and my dad was he was the assistant principal of science at Lafayette High School in Brooklyn, which is another like very historic Brooklyn high school. And so my parents definitely expected a lot out of academics. Like my sister is a scholar. My sister is a Harvard professor now. I'm the like black sheep of the family because I don't have a doctorate.
Yeah.
So my parents definitely expected a lot. My parents were the kind of parents who always taught their kids that they were special. Like they just really believed their kids were great. And just kind of started from that place. That's something.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
Just one sister. And, my sister is an incredibly accomplished person. She, head the women's studies department at Harvard. And, and I think a lot of that came from our upbringing where we were just kind of encouraged to be different, like, encouraged to just be who we were.
Yeah.
And it was celebrated, and it wasn't always easy. I mean, I wasn't the most easy kid to raise for sure. And
tell me about that. What kind of things did you get into that made your parents just lose it?
For me, it wasn't like big stuff. Mostly it was small stuff. Like I would leave the door open. Yeah. I would just like walk into the house and leave the door wide open in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Like, I would like, mess stuff up. I would go into my dad's like home office and leave a mess and things like that. I was not an easy kid to raise. And it's funny, I just spent time with my folks up in Maine where they have a lake house where they've been hiding out for coronavirus. And it's still kind of the same dynamic. They're just like, I kind of drive them nuts a little bit. But, it was when my sister and I talk about our upbringing sometimes. One thing that we say always is we knew we were loved. Like that was never questioned. Like we knew our parents loved us a lot. Sometimes we were just like, and my parents are like, also like, they're they were born in 1943. Mm-hmm. And so they came of age right before really the 60s. They got married before the world kind of opened up. Mm-hmm. And so they still, even though they're like politically liberal, they still have very conservative social values. And we know had they been born 2 years later, it might have been different. So, my sister and I, we were classic 80s kids, latchkey kids kind of thing, but also with a real like kind of modern sensibility and just kind of open to a lot of new things. And
did that cause like a teen rebellion, mom and dad really trying to like pull you back in any way, and you got
totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, my parents had a very, very conservative view of just things kids do. I mean, and I was a good kid. Like, I didn't really drink in high school, anything like that. But even like a hint of that was just something that like, it was just a really hard thing for my parents to understand because they didn't grow up that way at all. And now I feel for my friends who have kids because now like, kids have access to so many things, whether it's pot or porn or just what's on TV and media. Yeah. We didn't really have that in the 80s. Like, we weren't really surrounded by adult things.
You had to go out of your way to find it. It wasn't just like pick up your phone and there it is. Yeah.
Exactly.
So what was the most challenging part of being a kid for you? What was like the hardest, roughest, like most emotionally just like, well, I'm not getting this at all. What was that part for you?
That's a great question. Well, I think that's a really good question. But I look back at moments like the hardest part of being a kid is just kind of figuring out your friends and like and I'm really happy. Like, I look back, I remember that in high school, I had some falling out with friends. I had like periods where I wasn't hanging with like who I thought were like my best friends, and it was really painful. And then like I look today, and we're best friends again.
Wow.
But
still from high school. Wow.
Yeah. My best friends are from high school, and I've met so many amazing people in the jam scene, and people I truly love. But when I look at it, like I have this core group of people that I've known since I was a teenager, and they are my best friends. And, and it's also funny. I look back at all the people I've met in the music world, and the people I met at the very beginning are still my best friends. It's weird how that happens. You think you kind of self-select over time. The more people you meet, the more you get closer to the people who, you find your people. Well, I don't know. For some reason, I found my people really, really early in life. I found my best friends in high school, and my best music friends I like all met kind of almost on the same day in 1997 at a fish show in the Omni in Albany. Yeah. And, shout out John Schwartz, Greg Schenk, and Annabelle, Luke, and Stelling. Those are my besties. Those are my best friends in the music scene. And my high school crew, Brian, Keith, Adam, they're like, those are my best friends. And, so it's just funny how that happens. That's sort of how my life, not to take away from anything from all the people I become close with and love, but I just happens to be that I met my best friends early.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've found just talking to people over the years of, my travel, especially people who are like what you described of yourself as somebody who always was like on a crusade and like, there's this issue that's really burning at me, and I'm compelled to write about it or speak about it or write a song about it, or like, what is it that breaks your heart? It could be today, or what is it that broke your heart when you were a kid to get you to start thinking on a more like world vision, or at least in community in our country, like how can we affect change? What was there any one point of the thing that's just like, fuck, this fucking breaks my heart, and I feel like I got to do something?
Yeah. For me, it's like, it's freedom and civil liberties. It always has been. That's the thing. When I see somebody's rights being taken away, that's just something I really feel like. I actually like. I once, I actually got defended by the American Civil Liberties Union when I was a teenager.
Tell me about that.
it's when I was a teenager, I was standing on a subway platform, and I watched a crazy thing go down. I watched a bunch of cops just appear out of nowhere on a subway platform and start really, really harassing a group of black kids in Brooklyn. And it was intense. It was like almost like staged, like there was something was going on. And
what year was this?
1990.
Okay.
Yeah, I was a freshman in college. It was the summer that I was a freshman in college, and I was on my way to a first day of a summer job. I was working for the Purds, or I was going to be working for the Purds, knocking on doors for the environment. And I'm on this subway platform, and I just see this crazy thing go down where a cop is like in a kid's face. He goes, "I'm going to bite your fucking throat off." That's what the cop says to a teenager. And I walk up to the cop and I'm like, "I'm sorry. I just want you to know I was here and they weren't doing anything wrong." And the cops were like, "You get the hell away. You don't know what's going on." What ends up happening, long story short, is the cops follow a group of kids onto the subway. The kids are doing nothing wrong. I mean, nothing. The kids are sitting in their seat. They're really upset. There's one kid who's talking about, "We got to keep the peace. We got to keep the peace." He's repeating this. I mean, the kids are really upset. Yeah. And I'm just watching this, and the cops are just in their face. And I'm from my seat. I'm saying stuff, and it's like building and building and building. This is from 50th Street Station to Bay 50th to New Utrecht Avenue, if you know Brooklyn, in this time. And it's building and building and building. We get to New Utrecht Avenue, and more cops come onto the train. There's just crazy stuff going down. And I scream at the cop. I say, "You're harassing these people. I'm going to file a citizen's complaint." And they arrest me. They freaking arrest me. They're like, "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice." And suddenly I'm in handcuffs. They take four of us off the train, and I'm in handcuffs. And I'm 18 years old. And so they take me into the jail and the trains, and I spend the day arguing with the cop from the jail. It's like, you can't do this. You can't just arrest people. And eventually I get let out. I go. So I was supposed to start a summer job that day, working for New York Perks. And it was a Thursday because that's party night for the Perks. And I remember I was like, "Oh, this sounds fun." So I finally get out. I'm in probably about 6 hours. And my dad is really upset with me. He's like, "Why are you always in trouble? Why do you always have to take the stand?" Yeah. And I'm like, "'Cause you raised me that way. 'Cause it's just, these are the values you taught me." And then I'm like, "All right, I'm going to this party." They're like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Yes, I am. I've been in jail all day. Nobody's telling me where I can and can't go right now." So I go to this party, and one of the bosses. Now, all right, I was with my buddy on the train when this happened. We were going to our first day of the job. So he goes to the inn and tells everybody what happened. It's like, "This is why Andy Bernstein isn't coming in today." So I get to the party, and people knew what happened. It was kind of like, "Oh man, you're out," like whatever. So one of the bosses comes up to me and he goes, "Houston versus Hill." I said, "What?" This is Houston versus Hill. It's a Supreme Court case that says you can say anything you want to a police officer. A police officer cannot arrest you for what you say to them. I was like, "Huh." So I go to the library. I look up Houston versus Hill. I make a little photocopy, and I march into the offices of the American Civil Liberties Union. And sure enough, they end up taking the case. So I have pro bono legal representation. The case gets thrown out in 20 seconds. And it's funny how court really works, too. Like, the judge listens for a second, actually pulls out a book, reads the law, looks at it, not like on TV, and goes, "Case dismissed." I mean, it was so fast. It was over. But, but that was a formative moment. Like, I was, to this day, it's the only time I've been arrested. And it was, I really saw it. And it was in the 80s and the tail end of, the beginning of the 90s in Brooklyn in New York City. There was just terrible, terrible racial violence.
Stop and frisk. Yeah.
Many, many instances. Howard Beach, Bensonhurst. If you grew up in New York in this area, you know what those neighborhood names mean. And terrible. I mean, and we look at, where have we gone now? So 30 years later, and we're still facing the same things as a country. And people are still, the level of harassment that I witnessed that day was just shocking. It was just absolutely shocking. And what imagine the psychological impact. And I never, I wasn't on the receiving end of that, I inserted myself, but these kids that I saw, they had no choice, and the menacing behavior. And I want to say that I do believe that most police officers are good at their job and care. I've had a lot of encounters in my life in one way or another. And I definitely believe that the majority of police officers care about their job and care about people. But this was this wasn't just one cop. This was an entire group of cops. I don't doubt, I could tell from the incident there was history there. There clearly was some sort of thing that provoked it that I didn't see. But that's not how justice works. You can't just harass an entire group of people because of what happened yesterday. And to watch that, and I remember arguing with the cop all day, and it was like she needed a civics lesson. It was a female cop who arrested me and took me in, and she just didn't have a basic understanding of what people's rights were. Right. And that's the kind of thing, that really, really is upsetting when government and representatives of government do not respect what makes us American, what makes us free, all of these concepts that really predate America, the Magna Carta. They have Latin names for a reason. They've been around a long time. They are basic human principles of individual rights. And it's also such a shame that the word individual rights almost has been politicized, where it's been kind of claimed by the right, when it should be something that on every side of the ideological spectrum, we all have a lot of skin in that game. Individual rights and liberty belongs to all of us. And you look at what's happening in the country right now, that's what this is all about, and, we're standing up. So many are standing up for what is rightfully theirs, the right to get on a subway. The right to, if there was something that had gone wrong before, there's a process. You are charged. You have to defend yourself. You don't have a cop run up to you the next day and tell you they're going to bite your throat off.
Or murder you right in the street. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's just so real. It's so real. And we know that because it's in the headlines now. But we know that this has been happening regularly for the entire span of modern times. And it just, sometimes there's more attention on it.
And now we've got cameras on it.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's, it's the kind of thing, back then I would have just had my phone out and I probably wouldn't have been arrested.
Yeah.
I didn't have that then. So just had my mouth and getting up and saying, hey, this isn't right.
Yeah. So I want to jump. I think this is a really great jumping off point to the work that you started with HeadCount. So if you could just explain what HeadCount is and how you guys founded it and what your mission is.
Sure. Well, it is all kind of connected. So HeadCount, for those who aren't familiar, it's a grassroots nonprofit organization that does voter registration at concerts and works with musicians and entertainment industry to get people out to vote and get people participating is the through line that it's about being an active citizen, being informed, being vocal, being active. And that starts with voting, but definitely doesn't end with voting. Mm-hmm. And the way it started was, it was a very distinct moment. It's in 2003. We're at the height of the Iraq War. And there's a lot of, just like today, there's just deep political divisions in the country. People forget, I think, how divided the country was.
Oh, man.
And
like 80% of the country was in support of the war at that time.
Yeah. I feel like probably by 2003, maybe by the end of 2003, that had come down. We kind of went in a direction where we separated ourselves from the rest of the world and suddenly started losing allies. And it was very heartbreaking, to watch it all happen. And for people who were younger, might not remember or know, we went from everybody standing together to, over a pretty quick period, really strong disagreements of direction, and basically invading Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11, literally just factually nothing. And so the country becomes pretty divided at a certain point. And one of the things that was going on as part of the war on terror was throwing people into Guantanamo Bay without charges. And a lot of whom proved to be innocent, just had a similar name to somebody who was on a watch list. And that was something that was really upsetting. And at the time, my career at the time was I was a writer writing about sports. I wrote for a magazine called Sports Business Journal. I wrote about the business side of sports. And meanwhile, I had written a series of books about fish and co-authored a series of books about fish called The Farmer's Almanac with a PH. So that was my other life. I had this professional life doing sports business writing. And then I was going to fish shows, a lot of them, and editing this series of books about fish. So anyway, I'm sitting there doing it like I do every day, just on the phone talking to somebody about sports business. And somehow the conversation turns to Guantanamo Bay. I don't know why, but we just started talking about it. And that, as I said, that's the thing that really upsets me, when people's rights are taken away. And the idea that the United States of America, a country I do love and I do believe is a great country, that the United States of America would throw people in jail because of their name being on a list and not give them lawyers and not charge them. And early in Guantanamo Bay, they didn't even have lawyers. Mm-hmm. That made me nuts. And so I'm talking about this, me and this person who I'm interviewing, we start talking about this, and the interview ends. And I remember this so well, Michael. I just sat there and I looked at my computer and I said to myself, I got to stop complaining. What can I do? And I sat there. I was like, what can I do? And then I had the idea for HeadCount. And it was just a really simple idea. It was like, all right, if I can, the election had been decided, the 2000 election was decided by less than 600 votes. So there was this feeling of, if I could just move a few people, it can change the direction of the world. How can I move a few people? Well, I go to these concerts. I know people in this world. Maybe this is a difference that I can make. Maybe this is something that I'm capable of doing with what little knowledge I have and connections I have. So I think about the idea and I write out this long email, this plan for it. And I send it to my really good friend, Mark Bernstein of the Disco Biscuits. Mark and I grew up together in Brooklyn. He's one of those friends that predate for me the whole music scene. So I sent Mark this long email and he returns 2 words, I'm in. And so we started HeadCount. And we knew nothing. We didn't know anything about running a nonprofit.
So what was the initial mission? Was just to try to sign as many people up, get as many people registered as possible?
Yeah. And I'm sure at the moment, I think even from day one, we thought about the value of participation. I know we made the decision from the first second to be nonpartisan, because this wasn't, I want to get my candidate elected. This was, we believed that if we could get people off the sidelines, that would lead to the effect in the world we wanted to have. Yeah. And it was very, at the beginning, it was very jam-centric because that was what we knew. I looked at the sort of psychology of the archetype of the person in our scene was, strong positive values. I think our scene has very strong positive values, but maybe also disaffected, maybe believing that government doesn't apply to them or doesn't represent them or is completely corrupt. All pretty fair views. and that leads people to not participate. Well, as Hunter S. Thompson said in an interview at the time, if every deadhead in Florida had voted, the world would be a different place. So that was one of our early, we came upon that quote. We were like, yeah, that's what this is about. Let's change that dynamic. And Mark reached out to Al Schneer of Mo, and Al was one of our original board members. And then Al says, well, I kind of know Bob Weir. And Bobby was quoted in some articles about this around then and about voting. And so Al reaches out to Bobby. Bobby says he's in. We're like, oh my God, Bob Weir's on our board of directors. That's so cool. Yeah. And we built this thing up. Nadia Pressure, who you know well, Michael, was one of our original board members. Andy Gadiel, John Schwartz, Rich Goodstone, and Pete Shapiro. And there were more. And we just started this thing. I mean, we do nothing. We do absolutely nothing. We're like, well, how hard can it be? We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And then just it was really kind of mid-February. It took us a couple months to get going. I remember I went on Jam Cruise first. You were on that Jam Cruise.
I was on it, yeah.
And then got home and got to work. And we launched it mid-February. We kind of got to work in January. We launched it mid-February 2004. And magically, people started appearing and saying, hey, I hear you're doing this. Can I get involved? And we had this guy, John Gelbard, who is a PhD from Duke, who environmentalist. And he started organizing our volunteers. And this dude, Jay Carden, this genius dude, created our whole back-end volunteer organizing system that we use a version of to this day. And I look back now, it's we were so lucky and blessed. We didn't really understand that that doesn't just normally happen, that these brilliant people appear out of nowhere. We were all volunteers. No one was getting paid. And just people put everything into it in 2004.
Were you at the first table, the first concert? Were you actually tabling?
It was in Denver, and it was a show. We called it the HeadCount All Stars. It was Al and Mark, and I think probably Vinny Amico and Aaron Magnet from the Biscuits and Mo. And so the first show was in Denver. I was not at the first table.
What was it like the first time you tabled?
So I remember well. It was Government Mule in Sayreville, which is a great venue that a lot of people in the Northeast have been to. Yeah. And it was really interesting. I remember that night we registered over 50 voters. Right. At the time, at the beginning, there were so many unregistered people. 2000 had the lowest turnout ever. And we had just had a country had fallen off being engaged politically at literally historic levels. So when we first started with HeadCount, we would just show up and people would line up to register to vote. And I remember we registered 53 people at Sayreville. And I was like, oh, great, this is what it's going to be like. We're going to register 50 people at a concert every night. And
you're going to have your 600 deadheads in no time,
Yeah, exactly. And we did. That year we registered 50,000 voters. We grew the thing pretty fast. We had teams all over the country really fast. It was clunky. We were a bunch of jam band kids trying to figure something out. You can imagine. And but we went to Bonnaroo and we did public service announcements with the Dead and Dave Matthews and Fish that ended up on network TV. I mean, we did some cool stuff that first year. I look back at some of the people involved, Ashley Griffin, Michelle Rodriguez, many people who just really did a lot that I haven't talked to some of them in years, but I always try to think back, because HeadCount's doing really, really well as an organization now. And it's there were people who got us there who gave everything in year one with nothing coming back to them, no dollars, no access, all of the perks or, benefits, those didn't exist for us back then. And people just did everything they could.
Just from their hearts.
Yeah. And I want to note also the original group of musicians. The original musicians that got behind us were Government Mule, Derek Trucks, Reed Schnauer, Leftover Salmon, of course, the Disco Biscuits and Mo, and Michael Franti and Spearhead, an original.
Nice.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Franti here on the Stay Human podcast. A few years back, my wife Sarah and I decided that we would start a nonprofit with the intention of bringing people with advanced stages of life-threatening illness, children and adults with special needs, and wounded veterans to see any live concert by any artist in any city in the world. And from that, Do It for the Love was born. If you have a friend or family member who needs music in that way, just write to us at doitforthelove.org, and we'll make sure to get them out to see any concert in any city by any artist. Do it for the love, y'all.
So, how many people have you guys registered to date?
It's over 700,000.
Wow.
And that number will grow a lot in the next 6 weeks. That number, I hope, will grow by at least 100,000 in the next 6 weeks. It tends to happen kind of late up against the elections.
Mm-hmm. So this election, first of all, I feel like this election, regardless of whether it's won by either candidate, the presidential election I'm referring to, is for sure going to be contested. I don't really see there's any other way around it. And what the Trump administration has done with the Postal Service, and just by putting out the message out there that the elections are rigged, and as he did over the previous election, bot campaigns, foreign intervention into what's going on through social media. Like, we're in this crazy time where people are really, before it was people were like skeptical of government. Now people are like skeptical of the election being fixed in a way that you were used to seeing in banana republic, dictatorships. But we're the United States of America. This is where stuff is supposed to run there's a free and peaceful handover of stuff. How are you guys, sort of talking to people who are seeing this and going, well, why the fuck should I even, the whole thing is rigged and we're all about to go down into this wormhole of bots and foreign, tampering and everything else.
Yeah, well, it's tough, and what makes it even tougher is that we're not out physically talking to people right now in most cases. We are doing community events, and we have a great program called United We Vote that's really about registering voters in community events, and that's something anybody can participate in. If you go to headcount.org/United We Vote, you can print out QR codes and have text codes where you can register voters yourself. But we're not out there in the traditional way, obviously, because there aren't concerts. I think that for us, the big question now is how we can help people make their vote count. And there are real issues with undercounts of voting by mail. It's not fraud. There's no statistical documentation of fraud being an issue with voting by mail. But what's a huge issue is votes not being counted, most often because they arrive late. In about half the states or so, your mail-in ballot needs to arrive by election day, not be postmarked by election day. And that creates confusion where literally millions of people get it wrong and their votes don't count because they arrive after election day. And the most important thing we can do as an organization right now is educate people about how to make their vote count. If you're going to vote by mail, you got to be really careful on a bunch of things. You got to make sure it's done perfectly correctly. No stray marks. If it says do a check, do a check. If it says do an X, do an X. You got to make sure your signature matches what's on file. And that can be very tricky because people sign their names different ways. If you did it at the DMV, you may have signed with a stylus. And then you could sign it perfectly on your ballot, but it looks differently what you did on the DMV. So this is like nightmare scenario. And right now, polls say that a majority of Democrats plan to vote by mail, and a majority of Republicans plan to vote in person. Well, if you have a much higher rejection rate of vote by mail, you can just do the math. Now, the reason that nobody's ever heard about this before is because voting by mail is not partisan. It's something that there was not a strong partisan difference in who voted by mail. But because it got politicized this year...
Do you know how many people in past elections? What is the percentage of mail-in ballots in past elections?
It's about 25%. And that's a great question because people are like treating it like a new thing. It's not a new thing. You have 5 states that entirely vote by mail. So that drives a lot of that 25%. But absentee ballots, military voting, all these things, these are not new things. They're not terribly interesting. Like nobody ever cared until it was made a political issue. And now with the uncertainty with the post office, it just adds to all of that. There was a study a few years ago from MIT that said 22% of mail-in ballots get rejected. And
22%.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Wow. And half of it is because people just requested the ballot too late, and half was because of mistakes or they mailed it too late. A shocking number. And now, okay, that was a few years ago. This year, New York State, 20% of ballots were rejected. And the reason is the state mailed them too late, trying to catch up with demand because of COVID. And people got them too late, mailed them in. It's crazy stuff. Like when it's postage paid envelope, it doesn't get a postmark. So somebody could have even mailed it in time. It arrived late, but there's no postmark. And there you go.
Sat in a back room in a box for
even a day.
Too long.
Yeah. So what we're doing as HeadCount is a public information campaign to inform people about these things. And I didn't know about any of this. I do this for a living, and I didn't know about most of it until a few months ago. And I've become, better informed as an individual every day. And it's our job to share that knowledge. So one of the things we're going to do.
Can you just walk people through that right now? Like, what do you need to do to make your vote count, especially if you're voting by mail?
The best thing you can do is vote early in person. And everybody's got to make their own decision in terms of, quarantine and safety. But if you are leaving your house for other things, leave your house to vote. Don't get caught up in the politicized nature of this, because right now people think of it as almost a defiant act to vote by mail. If Trump is against it, I'm for it. Or if Trump is against it, I'm against it. Get that out of your mind. That's not helping you. The best way to vote is to vote early in person. Many states have early in person polling places. The states that don't, you can generally go into an election office, get an absentee ballot there, fill it out. You probably can ask an election official if you're doing it correctly, and do it very early. Now,
so when you say early, you don't mean early in the morning on election day. You mean weeks in advance.
Yes, good point. Good question. Yeah. So get it done as soon as possible, because in many states they have what's called a cure period. And if your ballot has a problem, they will actually call you. If your phone rings and it's a number you don't recognize, in this case, answer it, because it might be an election official saving your vote. So the more you get out in front of election day, the more you use the resources the states offer. In a lot of states, if you are voting by mail, you can track your ballot like an Uber, like ordering a Domino's pizza, and make sure it gets there. It's done by the barcoding. So there are ways to protect your vote, but there's also ways to throw away your vote. And if you are not careful in how you fill out the ballot, if you don't sign it in the right place, you don't mark it correctly, there are some states you need a witness. Even if you don't need a witness, have a friend or family member look at it, check your work kind of thing, because this is the kind of thing that, to your point, can lead to a disputed election. Can you imagine? Imagine that all the polls say one candidate wins and the vote count says somebody else wins. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine what that will mean to this country? We have never, to my knowledge, had that in our American history. And this is real. This could happen. And the best way to avoid that is to vote early in person, which is the most secure way to vote. And it's also to get all your friends and family to vote. Like, the number one influence on whether somebody votes is peers and family. As much as influential as HeadCount can be, and you can be, Michael, as a musician, nothing is more influential than a friend or a family member. And we all have friends and family, or we all have friends who don't vote. About 56% of Americans voted in the last election. So everybody knows somebody who didn't vote. And if it's coming up in conversation, or you start a conversation and people don't vote, what I say is don't be judgmental. Like, nobody likes that. You can't wave a finger at anybody and expect them to come around to your view. Try to listen, because there are many valid reasons people don't vote. As you said, people feel it's rigged. People don't like the candidates. People just aren't personally interested. And, if somebody's not personally interested, it's okay to say, hey, well, I'm interested. Maybe will you do this for me? Or if somebody doesn't like the candidates, being able to say, hey, maybe we don't like the candidates, but there are clear differences here in policy positions, and what's an issue you care about? Let's look at where they differ. There are always good reasons to vote. And I think everybody having that conversation with friends and family is really important now. And if everybody can get, 3 friends to vote, well, you're tripling or quadrupling your own influence. And that's a really positive road to go down right now.
Mm-hmm. When you watch an election approaching, do you get more excited if the voter turnout is high, or do you get more excited if your candidate wins? You personally, I'm talking about.
I personally get very excited about voter turnout. And let me give an example. 2017 and 2018, record turnouts in the recent elections. And so 2018 had the highest turnout for a midterm election in 100 years. Turnout by young people nearly doubled. And you know who won? Well, both sides won that election. The Democrats took back the House. The the Republicans actually, I think, gained in the Senate. So you had a high turnout election where both sides won. And in that case, America won. And I think the silver lining of this really messed up time we're in terms of the divide is that people are more engaged than ever. You had polling going into 2018 where for the first time ever, voters in both parties were at record levels on their excitement about voting. And while I think there's many, many, many bad things going on right now, I think a good thing is that people care. People are paying attention. People have strong opinions. People see how government impacts their lives. And that can have a positive outcome for years to come. I mean, this is an historic election, and every presidential election is. Mm-hmm. But, the decision on whether or not we go in the direction we're currently going in clearly is a gut check on America, on American values, on what we ultimately believe in. Mm-hmm. And history books will write about. And, but now I think more and more people see that. I think despite COVID-19, you had record turnout in the spring. You had record turnout in a lot of states, even after the Democratic nomination was decided. So people are leaving the sidelines. And, we also saw it from Black Lives Matter protests that it was a political awakening for many. We were registering a lot of voters at these events just through these QR codes we saw on our website. So now where HeadCount registers most voters is at headcount.org. Mm-hmm. And we've had record-breaking June, July, and August. More people are coming to our website than ever to register to vote by a mile, by like 10 times where we were 4 years ago. Of course, we don't get to be at concerts, but we're more than making up for it in the virtual space. And a lot of people don't even know that you can register to vote digitally. You can. It's kind of different for every state, but you can go to headcount.org. There, you can register to vote. You can check your registration status. And that's another thing that everybody should do. Right? Especially if you didn't vote in the last election, no shame in that. Vote in the next one. Just go to our website and check your registration status. It takes 30 seconds. About 16 million people have been purged from the voter rolls in the last 2 years. You don't want to be one of them. And there's a lot of really messed up ways that happens. It divides a lot of it by young people and people of color are most likely to get purged for a lot of different reasons that are really messed up. So check your registration status. If you do know that you want to vote by mail, get your absentee ballot request in early. You can do that at headcount.org. And we're going to have a lot of information on early voting sites, which are starting to come together. So you can find out everything you need. Be an informed voter. Plan your vote. Think about how you're going to do it, because election day may be a nightmare. I mean, if we have, if COVID comes back with the colder weather that some people predict and flu season, election day really could be dangerous. So you have like in Virginia, early voting starts as early as September 18th. People have an opportunity to vote very soon. Get it done. Get it done. Get it done. Get other friends doing it. And, nobody, I think, wants to look back at this historic moment and say they did nothing.
Yeah.
And that's not going to feel good. And if that's the temptation, well, do it for yourself in the future, because I just can't imagine somebody saying, "Oh, thank God I didn't vote." Said no one ever,
Yeah.
So, it's now we're at a really true historic moment.
Yeah. I want to go back to Mr. Weiss and this American Dream class, and just want to know what your thoughts were about what the American dream meant when you were 16, and what does it mean to you today with all the things that we see happening in our country, for good and for bad. It's a challenging time, but it's a really important time. How has your vision of the American dream evolved?
That's such a great question. Well, I think that, and the American dream changes over time, and that's what the class was about. But I think that the thing that connects it all together is that America is the land of opportunity. And throughout history, there have been barriers to that, and there have been inconsistencies. But ultimately, as I said, I do love this country, and I do believe in this country, and I do believe that America is a place where if you work hard, you can get ahead. Are there inequities? Absolutely. And how you're born and what your parents had before you is going to impact your abilities more than anything else. And no doubt, the color of your skin, as well as your economic class, impacts that. And you can prove that statistically in every way. But we are in a country where every day people achieve, where greatness can be rewarded. And I believe that is our value as a country, this idea of opportunity. And I feel like that gets lost. I feel like we talk so much about what we don't have and what's wrong that, we don't talk enough about how the dignity of hard work is a phrase that I know it from the senator in Ohio, Sherrod Brown. And that phrase just kind of resonates with me, that there's a commonality that's not right or left, not Republican or Democrat, that Americans work hard. We work more hours. We put in a lot. And the idea of the American dream is that we're supposed to get it back. And when that isn't happening, our dreams are being taken away from us, and we need to fight to make it happen. But I think that the ultimate core value of this country is that we are capable, our citizens are capable, and we can do great things. And, when HeadCount started, I just said we knew nothing, but we all just threw ourselves into it. And the musicians threw themselves into it and made themselves available. And we built something that's now 16 years old. We have over 20 employees. We're going to register another 100,000 people just in the next month or two. And we just had this crazy idea that we could do this. And I think that's uniquely American. And I think that it definitely comes from a place of privilege to think that way. I want to acknowledge that it's easy for a white kid whose, parents were educators to be like, hey, if we work hard, we're going to get ahead. But I still do fundamentally believe that is the American dream, and that when we all can, on some level, connect with that, and when we kind of keep that as our American North Star, that everyone can benefit. I still believe in that.
This has been a great talk. I hope it's inspired people to make sure that they register, make sure they have a plan for their voting. And this election is a historic election. There's more on the line here in terms of, like you said, just the direction of our country ultimately than there ever has been before. And we end this podcast the same way every time. And I ask the guests, what does it mean to you to stay human? So, Andy, Go for it.
Well, it's it's sometimes you have to like find the things that are truly you and embrace them. I'm the things I love, I do so much. I'm a big skier and I'm a big hockey fan. And I ski I live on a little ski mountain near New York City, and I ski. Some years I'll ski 60 days a year, and I watch an amount of hockey that is just like absurd. And so it's like no matter how hard you're working, no matter how much you're caught up in life, just I try to do the things I love, and I love winter sports basically. And I also go to a lot of festivals and a lot of concerts. And so I'm blessed that I get to do these things. And again, a place of privilege for sure to be able to like live on the side of a little mountain and throw my skis on. I have a really blessed life. And I found my spot. I found my physical spot in the world. As I said, I found my friends very early and I hung on to them and they put up with me. And the way to stay human is just, be yourself, and if you love something, do it all the time. Why not? You only go around once. That's how I stay human.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. If people want to get registered to vote, go to headcount.org. You can do it digitally. Make sure you vote early, and it's best to vote in person. And Andy, thank you so much for just your dedication to this. It's it's something that people don't think about the majority of the year. There's so many other issues that we talk about, but the way that we can sort of work on those issues, each of us as individuals, is through our power of voting. So thank you for keeping that message alive for all these years and inspiring so many people and registering so many people. And let's go out there this year and see if we can just set new numbers for voter participation. Let's do that.
Absolutely. Michael, thank you. This is really a pleasure. Thank you for all your support over the last 15 years and being an inspiration. And I guess you'll have to vote absentee from where you are. Just get it in early, man.
My ballot's on its way. Yeah.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you, brother. Peace.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, this is Michael Franti here on the Stay Human podcast, and I've traveled all throughout the world and I've been to many inspiring places, and one of my favorites is Bali. I fell in love with its people and nature the first time that I came here in 2007, and at that time I had a dream to build a place that was dedicated to music, soul, and wellness. And from that, the Soulshine Bali Hotel was born. It's my boutique hotel located in the heart of Bali, surrounded by beautiful rice fields and the most incredible sunsets that you might ever experience. We do over 50 retreats a year, or you can just come here and spend a night on your own. So follow us on Instagram at Soulshine Bali.